Welcome to Uncomfortable, conversations about culture and Christianity. My name is Eric, and today I'm joined by Jess.
Hello, world.
And Alex.
This drink slaps.
Does it? What you drinking? We're going to start doing drink reviews?
Diet Dr. Pepper.
I used to listen to a podcast that they would start out with drink reviews. They'd all like crack open a can of energy drinks or something.
No, but
I would be up for
slaps,
that.
You know, which means it's cool. This has nothing to do with our headline later.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Good. I'm glad you don't like puns at all.
Yeah.
So you're drinking a Diet Dr. Pepper?
DDP, that's what I like to call it.
Really?
You know, a DDP a day.
DDP over there?
Yep.
All right.
I think I've been most impressed with the new Diet or Dr. Pepper Zero.
It is good.
It's pretty good at blend. I mean, you're not fooling anybody, right? It's a diet drink. But it does do a good job at masking that flavor. But
It does.
All
the aspartame people out there are going to get us.
I have so many TikToks saved on my phone of people explaining why aspartame is not bad. That I can send those to them if they'd like.
So email us at podcast.
Yeah, if you'd like a TikTok about why aspartame is not bad and it's just a normal chemical that's found in food that you can digest, I will send you several TikToks on it. Because
that's really generous of you.
I really am just justifying my Diet Coke addiction,
Which is what most of us do.
Yeah, that's all we're doing.
I support that.
Speaking of, I was out of town last week, just enjoying a nice little getaway. And we have a volunteer in you that posted a TikTok.
Right.
And it just caught fire a little bit. It went shall we say viral?
The dream of going viral. It sounds like a bad thing to people who aren't, privy to the internet terms, but
I
it's
asked
typically
my son,
a good thing.
My 9-year-old, if he knew what going viral was, and he didn't yet. So.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good. My kids definitely did, and we were out. My dad was visiting this weekend, and we were visiting some family. We were at dinner, and I'm like on my phone the whole time because it's just the church's TikTok account is just going crazy at the very beginning, because it's like later on it kind of started delivering the notifications in waves, so it wasn't as much. But at the very beginning, I'm just like constantly refreshing. And I'm like, this video went up by 10,000 views. It went up by another 10,000, another 10,000. Awesome. It just kept going. And the whole time my kids are just like, how much money are you getting for that? And I was like, zero. What are you guys talking about? There's no money. There's no money coming in for this.
So for those that don't know, tell us the premise of our TikTok and
this one specifically. Yeah. That's good to know. No, I think we could probably do a whole episode on just talking about social media, because that's kind of what I do here a lot. So, but specifically with TikTok, we've wanted to be very intentional about not just posting what is on other social media accounts from churches, like sermon clips. I mean, we do a little bit of that, but we wanted to kind of pay attention to the tone of TikTok. There's a certain type of humor that goes over well on TikTok. And and so volunteered, we'll call him Nathan for short. And he and I kind of brainstormed some different ideas. I mean, he's the one who initially thought of the idea of Sundays Out of Context, which you can find on our TikTok.
So cool. I love that.
And so just kind of leaning into that. And this one specifically is about if you took the lyrics of worship songs literally. And you can check it out at CCC Omaha and watch it for yourself. But it was a lot of fun to make, and it was quick. It was like he came in a Thursday afternoon, and we spent a couple hours filming it.
Without giving it away, because you really have to watch it. I will say that I passed you in the hallway on your way to film it, and you had you were just covered in plastic snakes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it just got me thinking, what is he up to? So I have to check it out. So
it's just one of those things. I mean, and it really did. It was cool to just see all the comments and people taking it really well, and knowing that it's coming from a church, and just some people are kind of surprised by that. But
yeah, speaking of TikTok, I had I had a little bro vacation kind of thing last weekend. So a couple of years ago, the journey group or community group I'm a part of, we multiplied, and it stunk, to multiply as far as like you built some good relationship with some guys and things like that. And so one of the things we did was get together all like the OGs, the original guys that were part of that group, and we went to one of the guys' houses and hung out, which was fun. And we did this bro Olympics is what we called it. And we all had to do a life hack.
Okay.
We created a TikTok account, and one of the competitions was we had to create a life hack and post it on TikTok like all at the same time, and whatever got the most views would be the winner. I did not win that competition, but the one that did get the most views was a life hack about opening a pop can. So like if you have a carbonated beverage and you take like a pen and just rub it really fast on the top of it, it'll explode. So shout out to Eric for winning that.
Not me, by the way.
Yeah, I guess you're not one of the
Semi-viral at like
bros.
12,000.
Yeah, I'm still waiting for an invite to anybody's community group. So if someone could just send me that, that'd be great.
I'm sure you could join. It'll be a long drive. Jess's would be a lot shorter.
Okay,
So.
yeah.
I'm like midway.
Okay,
I
But you'll never find
I don't
it.
actually
That's
have a
taken
group
down. That
either.
TikTok. It was just for the weekend.
Oh, okay. So we can't
So
go
you
search.
just promoted this thing,
That
and
was-
we all got excited
It was just
about
fun. It was like a
Even
fun,
us here-
random, like dad's terrible TikToks of like life hacks, and so it was just kind of funny.
People do love good dad TikTok.
Yeah,
It was an exciting weekend,
but
which
Great.
leads
we're
us
happy
to
for you.
No, I'm saying which leads us to maybe our headline, which was
you obviously
an
got some
exciting
sun,
headline.
and we are pasty white
Yeah,
Midwesterners.
yeah, we did.
More looks like boils right now, if you can see.
You
me.
do have a little peely skin
Peely
going on, so
skin.
but I'm happy for you.
Yeah,
If anybody
me too.
has any great TikTok ideas, go ahead and send them to alexe at
Or just like-
cccoma.org.
life hacks.
All right, up next we've got headlines. All right, our headline this week comes from BBC.com. This is, this is no surprise to anyone. Almost a week removed now, we're still talking about it. The slap heard across the world. This BBC headline says, Will Smith hits Chris Rock on Oscars stage. Now, when this thing first started blowing up, I kept seeing people on Twitter saying, Will Smith just punched Chris Rock. And I was like, what's going on? I punched him, huh? And then I saw the video and I was like, it's more of a slap, but still a very, very almost rehearsed slap in some ways. Like you can tell he had done stage slaps before. Like his posture, the follow through, everything was very precise in a way that you don't see too often.
Yeah.
Anyways, if anyone is living under a rock or maybe choosing to live under a rock, which is all, that's a
we
valid
really-
option.
yeah, I guess we can't blame.
I'm not against that, but the comedian Chris Rock was hosting the Oscars, and he made a joke in reference to Will Smith's wife, Jada, who has been very public about her struggle with alopecia, and so her head is bald. And Rock made a joke about her being in G.I. Jane 2. Everybody was kind of laughing it off, and then Will Smith went up on stage and slapped him, and then sat back down and proceeded to yell, "Keep my wife's name out of your mouth," with some added vulgarity. But yeah, I wasn't watching. I haven't watched the Oscars in a while. I used to watch it pretty religiously, but I kind of got out of that habit. But it definitely seems like it took away from that night. Like, I don't think people are really talking about the movies that are winning or the actors that are. I mean, the other side of this is Will Smith went on to win, lead male actor of the year. So.
Yeah. I have so many friends, guys. I was in another group text that actually, this is my humble brag. No.
Yeah.
Welcome to the Alex show.
of college friends. I was like sleeping, and then my wife's like, your phone keeps lighting up. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like what? And then a friend sent me the Japanese clip because it had all of the actual words said. And I'm like, what in the world?
Yeah.
I'm like, I'll have to see this in the morning. But I was like, at that moment, I was, kind of dazed and confused. I'm like, yeah, this is all an act. I just thought it was entertainment or whatever. And then obviously the more and more has come out that it was not an act when I woke up. And then he did end up going on to win, an award and that. I mean, his son, who, finds himself in headlines every so often, tweeted like right afterwards, that's how we do it, like kind of advocating for it. But it's been wild. And even in watching Will's acceptance speech, it was like there was kind of an undercurrent acknowledgement of it, but without going there, and like remorse. It's just quite the saga.
Well, even the way it played out, where the camera shows that Will is laughing at that joke, and so you don't think anything of it, but right before it cuts away from him, they show Jada's face, and she's visibly upset.
Her eyes, yeah.
And then the next thing you know, he's approaching the stage, which is just so whatever happened in those 2-3 seconds between, when we didn't see, like if he made eye contact with her and she's upset, and then that changed his mood about it. I don't know.
Yeah, I was so confused because I was watching it in real time, and I saw, obviously, like, they censored it here, like you couldn't hear what he said, but then, like, right away I saw the Japanese clip. Same friend, Zach, sent it.
It was circulating on Twitter as well.
So then I'm like, oh, I gotta text Eric, because I figured, Eric, you were watching.
Yeah.
I figured Alex was
sleeping.
Yeah, on a beach somewhere.
Just sleeping.
And so
that's mostly what I did in there anyway. So,
but I was so confused. I was so confused because Chris Rock was presenting. He wasn't even hosting, right? And he. There were other jokes that had been told earlier that I'm like, they're way worse.
It's classic.
They're way
this
worse.
is what you do at these award shows. Like if you've seen him, like look back 2016, he hosted and kind of took some digs at them because they've had some problems in their relationship.
And not only that, but later on in the night, there was a joke about somebody else's wife that Amy Schumer did, and it was just interesting that, like, I don't know. No, I thought it was interesting that there was like another couple's joke where like she pushed the guy's wife who isn't famous out of the screen and is like, "Oh, she's just an extra. Let me sit here." And I mean, that could be as equally as hurtful. I don't know.
Well, and you can tell that. I mean, they've had their marriage issues have been very public, and so there's just something else that's going on. And it's pretty evident in Will's life for him to go to. This
felt like an emotional breaking point for him. Like there's been a lot of things that have happened in their marriage that have been public that, oh my goodness, can you imagine if like all of our marriage stuff or personal stuff was just out for people to critique? But I'm like, this is not Will Smith's character. We've seen Will Smith in front of the camera. He's like a great social media
influencer.
Influencer.
Speaking of TikTok,
he does great. And I'm just like, he had to have known, but it was just like, this was a moment. And I thought it was interesting, like just psychologically watching people process in a short amount of time, because people were shocked. And then he got a standing ovation for his award not an hour later, but then just to see how celebrities have processed like the next day, kind of coming out and not agreeing with what he did and not condoning it. But then a lot of people like in the moment saying, "Hey, you're good. Like you did the right thing." I don't know.
I saw one of the most helpful takes I took on that. And I think we see this all the time in society, but someone was saying that this is like how they've seen like a Rorschach test. So that's like the ink blot type of test, and that you put that out there, and then all three of us would have to explain, to a psychologist, what do we see? They show it to a patient. Yep. What do you see? And each response just is insightful about the psyche of a person. And, I think in this, and we see it in politics in a lot of different places, but in this, it's like some people, this person said, I see friends of mine calling Will Smith a coward and calling the slap against Chris Rock a cheap shot that Chris never could have expected. Then on the second side, I have friends that see that same thing, hailing Smith as courageous and celebrating for stepping up and defending his wife. And so over and over, there's these different takes on the exact same incident that people that are wise and smart and respectable people are seeing this from a different lens, and maybe our own life and circumstances maybe interpret how we're seeing it as well.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I look at these two guys, and they're both individuals that I've looked up to in different ways growing up. Like whether for different reasons, and when I saw that interaction, I'm just like, well, what in the world is really going on here? And I think my first reaction is like, well, okay, Chris Rock is a comedian. They say this stuff all the time. Why is this, why do you think you get to go slap him? And then, the stuff about the alopecia comes out and you're like, okay, well, maybe, that can be a little, that's almost maybe a little too hurtful. But did Chris know? People are saying, well, of course he knew because she came out about this. But I didn't know about that until this whole thing broke. But it's just tough because it's like,
but is it okay?
Yeah, that's the thing. Is like you can't justify that sort of an act because of that. You know what I mean? Like if we just go around justifying slapping people because they say something we don't like or they say something mean. I mean, what example does that set for our society, for our children, for that's really tough. I mean, I think to a certain extent, as a husband, you can think, well, yeah, if my wife was struggling with this thing and you're at home, you're dealing with all the emotions, all the self-esteem issues because of this, like you're living in all that. And then you're sitting there and you're laughing at this joke and then you realize how hurtful it is. In that moment, there's that emotional, his adrenaline had to just been going like, and he's just like, I'm going to go defend my wife. And this is what I think I need to do. But it's just, still, I think I've seen some takes where people are like, what if he would have just went up and taken a microphone and explained like why this joke is so hurtful, and then brought awareness to this alopecia thing that people might not be aware of. Like he could have done something like that people would have been praising him till this day. Chris Rock might have had a little egg on his face or whatever, but it wouldn't have been like this thing that's looked at as like a violent act. He could have defended, that, and that's just one hypothetical. Yeah. But there's, we could do that all day. But I
feel like it was justified away though. It was very confusing to me when he gets up and starts talking about, the Lord is leading him to love.
Yeah.
So, and also justifying why he did that.
Yeah.
And I'm just like if
the crazy
Jesus
father
was there,
protecting.
If we were loving,
yeah.
I think that he would have handled it differently. And so it's confusing all around. It's also confusing of like, okay, well, if you hurt my feelings, can I slap you? Like if you make me mad enough? I mean, you're within
been close.
You're within
I'm
great
sure.
range, Alex. But it's just like,
I'd like to see this happen.
Well, even in like that, like there's only so many people you'd think they would even allow to walk on stage in that moment without security getting
Smith,
them,
right?
But yeah, because no one's thinking that's going to happen, right?
And that's the thing. Somebody made the call because security was ready, but Will Smith had a group of 20 people with him.
Yeah, he's front and center.
So they knew if they went and got Will Smith, then there was going to be a bigger issue. So somebody chose.
I'm saying even in that moment to walk up. So for example, at CCC, if I'm preaching or Mark's preaching, if I get up and walked up to Mark in the middle of a sermon, like the security's not going to stop me, because they know me. They're not assuming I'm doing anything harmful. There's some people, if they just walked up randomly onto the stage that, we have a lot of people that probably want to protect Mark or whomever is on stage or worship leader in that moment because they're unknown commodities and there's not that trust built. And so you'd assume that that's probably why they let that happen. And man, Chris's response though, I mean, dude took the hit. He took the hit. I mean, talk about turning the other cheek.
He didn't even rub his face afterwards.
No, I mean, the dude was in shock. I thought, man, Will is going to get, he's going to sue him. And I mean, again, there's probably a lot to be played out still, but he had chances to press charges. It's crazy to me right now to think like the Oscars didn't like kick Will out at that point. Like what other scenarios does this happen though, that you get to go assault somebody? Like if that happened, one coach to another coach in the middle of a game. Yeah. You're out of here. Yeah. Like you just don't get to do that.
No.
It's
I know.
But I think, and we haven't really touched on this and, I don't know how far we'll get into it, but I think it speaks to celebrity culture as a whole. Like the way that we fixate on celebrities, the way we put them above anybody else. And I think even in that environment, you have people who are probably in security or other types of officials in that room who really have no idea what, these people are kind of above reproach. So they're thinking they wouldn't act this way. There's no reason they're going to act this way. They're on a different level. They have too much publicity to protect. They have their personality, their social identity to protect. And this just is unconscionable to most people. And so when this happens, I mean, on both sides, like we're all internalizing and go, well, what if it was me? Would I do this? Or how would I react? Or, we're all living vicariously through these celebrities anyways. And then you pile this on top of it. And I think people are just flabbergasted, right? We just don't know how to respond.
Mostly curious if his mom's going to send him to live with his auntie and his uncle in Bel Air.
Okay.
Got in one little fight and she got scared.
Okay.
Sorry, music just pops in my head. It is going to be crazy how it plays out. I know Jesse sent us a clip from Ellen and Wanda Sykes, who was actually one of the hosts, and just how it overshadowed the Williams, the people that were actually hosting. I mean, if that didn't happen, we're not talking about this probably that he won an Oscar, maybe, except the other film that I really need to watch. My wife keeps telling me, what is it?
Coda.
So,
well, and even and I think was it Jim Carrey who he was pretty outspoken about this too, and saying that Chris could have sued Will Smith because of this video is just going to live on forever.
Yeah, and maybe it could happen.
It still could probably,
but definitely didn't choose to press charges right in the moment, and just wild.
I think there needs to be accountability, though. I mean, whether he's sorry, that's great. He didn't apologize to Chris Rock.
Which we're recording this in advance, and I think they're meeting.
Right, so there could be something.
They're meeting.
So the Academy's meeting,
this,
today to.
Which you told me before the show, Jess, that it sounded
he could lose his Oscar. He could get suspended from the Academies for a certain amount of time.
Yeah.
There's definitely things that could happen.
So if you're listening to this, you might know more than we do right now.
Maybe.
So
he might be sending his trophy back.
Oh. All right. Well, let's just not say mean things about people, and let's not slap people either. Maybe that's probably pretty easy rules to follow. Up next, we are going to be talking about your Sunday best. Them church clothes. Easter is approaching, and that's one of those Sundays when people like to really show out, put their best on that day. So we thought maybe we'd talk about Easter, not just Easter, but church clothes, what you wear, clothing in general, because it tends to creep up in maybe private conversations, in gossip, and I don't know.
Sneaking a pic and sending a text.
Christians can probably be the most critical about that. I mean, but I think non-Christians can also be pretty petty about it as well. So let's dive into it a little bit. This is also, Alex, you mentioned this was brought upon by a listener submitting this topic idea. Do you have any framework for that to help us?
No, I mean, we're
understand?
always asking for what kind of topics and insight, and someone shared that they thought, they were grateful for our conversation around Turning Red the week before, and they just appreciate our insight, which is, I mean, it's humbling that people are like, hey, we want to know your opinion on something and have us dialogue about it. And so I think that's it. I think the conversation was, church dress, and also just, I think this person's got a preteen. And so as they're raising, their pre-teenager, how do we start to navigate, as obviously when a kid goes from picking out their own outfits, Jess is still picking out all her son's matching outfits, to eventually they're going to say, we want to pick out our own matching outfits.
Our own matching.
And so I do, I have a 9-year-old and I'm not quite there. All my daughters are picking out their own clothes, but as a dad, and one day you're like, okay, how do we navigate this? And so I think that's the other part of it. How should you address appropriately at church, but then also as a Christian who is the church, who is representing Jesus, how do we dress just in life in general?
I think this is a topic people eye roll at, but it's a little big topic. I mean, it's one that's very subtle, like you're saying. It's unnoticeable, but everybody at one point or another has made a comment, noticed somebody else. I'm looking at, what the heck are you wearing?
Yeah.
And it's just
he has a shirt with bears on it.
Yeah, I mean, I've shared on here even one time that I rolled up my pants a little bit from the bottom. And people say stuff. And people,
when you were preaching.
Okay.
Yeah, when I was preaching, and people commented about it. And that even got me thinking differently about what I wear.
And if I guess this makes it very CCC-ish, but if you have attended here, it's like when Steve Yost wears Chucks, we're talking about it. We're noticing those
when
shoes.
he wore Yeezys that one Sunday. People were talking about it.
And people have come up to me,
people will say stuff.
After preaching and been very disgusted by, people wearing holy jeans.
But it's the holiest of days.
Yeah, it is. And those things, and those people have a lot of conviction around it. And like I can empathize with it in some ways as well. It doesn't mean I agree, but how we were brought up, maybe the church environment we were brought up in, the family environment we were brought up in, a lot of those do really shape this in our lives more than maybe we often talk about.
Okay, so I am curious. Like as you're mentioning that, just quickly, how do we grow up? What did you grow up wearing? Was there expectations?
To
kind
church,
of like
and
where
then
are we coming from? Yeah.
And then just expectations outside of it.
What was there an expectation of what you wore to church?
Yeah.
Oh, it's Easter Sunday. Put on your bolo.
Yeah. I wore my bolo tie. You wore your nice jeans, your good jeans, or some sort of slacks, and a button-up shirt. I don't know, a tie, maybe. I mean, my dad was a pastor. He always wore some sort of a suit. Yeah. But even though they're usually like Western themed suits, they were still a suit.
Yeah, I definitely grew up in a church where you are dressing maybe at a more formal level than you are throughout the week. That there's definitely a noticeable on a Sunday service that you are, and it was kind of like, the lines I heard were, if the president was coming to visit or someone in, of note
would you wear this?
Was coming, would you, how would you present yourself? This is respectful. And some of these things carry over, honestly, into my own, how I dress today at church, not wearing a hat into a service, those types of things. And so, I grew up in a very diverse church. And so I had like colorful suits were kind of.
Is that why you button your top button so the devil can't get down there?
Yeah, for sure. It's my neck chastity thing.
I've never heard that.
So I had a red suit. I had a baby blue suit. I had pinstripe
suits.
Where
are these?
And the shoes. There's pictures that
so
suit and shoes matched.
But 90s suits, was this 90s?
They were
was this late 90s or early 2000s?
Yeah, late 90s into early 2000s.
Because those suits then were the ill-fitted suits, right? The big baggy pants.
Yeah, they were big.
Like a zoot suit almost.
Yeah, that's what we called them.
Really?
Suits.
Yeah.
How about you, Jess?
I grew up, I think, high expectations for modesty, and I think definitely went to a church that was influenced a lot by just the purity culture in the 90s and early 2000s, and so it was always had to wear a dress to church, could never wear pants, and then obviously the typical knees not showing, nothing super form fitting.
Yeah.
And then there was a period of time where we went to a church that wore head covering, so that was a whole nother experience that we might get into later on. But I just feel the expectation of just being modest, girls can't wear pants, definitely no hats in church. I think typical when we think back of hey, what I don't know if we want to say what did it used to be like, or what was a more a less casual time in life. Those are the typical things is typically what I grew up with. Good times.
So would we say that this is what we wear to these like a church setting? Is that about being authentic, or is it about being respectful? Is there a mix of that? Does that carry over into the day to day? Or is it because the problem I have with this conversation is, to me, your wardrobe is much more about your personality than it is about your level of respect for the people you're around now. More in today's society, because I remember when jeans were being more socially acceptable in the workplace. That you would see on the East Coast and the West Coast, people were wearing jeans to work all the time, but in the Midwest, it was still a big no-no in the mid 2000s to a certain extent. And so as that became more acceptable, it's just one of those things where the clothing issue for me, I just struggle with it even being an issue sometimes, because it just seems like such a small thing. But,
I don't know if there's a better word to choose from if we're saying authentic and respectful, because I think somebody that's being authentic can also have a heart of wanting to be respectful or being respectful. But I think we don't question the authenticity of somebody, but we easily question, like, oh, this person's not respectful, or this person is not doing this because of this. So it's like, to me, being authentic is like a personal choice, like out of like your belief system or your convictions.
Yeah, and I think in American history, especially, which is obviously where a lot of this is going to be derived from, our church experiences, you know, through times like the Great Depression, or when we had more blue collar kind of working kind of style and things like that, there was just a more grunge in your day-to-day life than there even is for most people that go to work today. There was, you know, your hands were dirty, they were worked, you were working the soil, or you're working a machine, and just kind of those pictures and images from those times. There was definitely this more dirty kind of look, because that's just how life was, especially at that time, you know, in American culture. Men, you know, had a lot of those blue collar jobs in factories, farms, etc. And so that step up to a Sunday reverence kind of thing was in some ways a pride thing, and even a reprieve from you know, other times of the week. And so it was a way to kind of separate themselves from that kind of thing. And so some of that depression mindset ended up carrying into, you know, some of the church, and with great, you know, reasoning and all of that. And so I think that was a part of it, even dressing up, you know, for movies and those types of things. It was just a bigger deal to dress up, to go out for anything. And so some of that maybe carries on to our culture for dates, or, you know, going to a certain show or a gala or things like that. But we've definitely live in a space where things are a little bit different, even how we work and what the workforce looks like, for sure. So
what do our clothes communicate about us then? I think to your point, if I was wearing a conductor's outfit, you'd know I worked as a train conductor. I mean, I'm wearing this Western shirt today, so maybe I'm a cowboy. But I mean, there's kind of those like rudimentary ideas of, oh, it's a policeman or whatever. But I do think that there is this. I mean, you look at Catholic priests, or even priests in other denominations that wear the collar, and that identifies them very, very clearly. I even knew someone who was an evangelical pastor who wore that, and he had this strong conviction about wearing that because he knew that it held him accountable to who he was, and it also, he felt it made him available to people when he was in public, and that they would approach him if they were in need, or they wanted, and that was one of those things I was always, I mean, in the church that I grew up in, that was unheard of to wear the priest collar, you know, that was a Catholic thing or whatever, but it was one of his convictions, and I learned to respect that a lot because of the way he carried himself in public, and I thought that was kind of an interesting thing. But I do think what we wear definitely in some ways communicates, I mean, whether that's a cultural thing or whatever, maybe a class thing as well.
Yeah, I think for sure there was a time in an era where uniforms were just across the board. No matter what you did, you just kind of identified everyone had matching uniforms or whatever. And even a lot of those companies like a Target, you kind of know there's the red and the khaki, but at one point there was like the exact same outfits people were wearing, and waitresses and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot of places that do that anymore, but I think it does represent our personality. Class, I think, is undoubtedly something that is represented by brands, by, you know, the shiny thing. I remember, man, just longing for a pair of Tommy Hilfiger jeans, you know, with the loop, and it had the red and the white on the loop.
The carpenter
jeans, like, because
so you could put your hammer there.
If I could get those for when I was roller skating, like, people would know. And really that was driven by a class thing. Like, I wanted to be seen as cool, as in, as hip. Yeah. And really, that's probably a drive behind a lot of trends and fashion and so on and so forth. So.
Oh, I'm also thinking, though, it's so different between men and women because your experience would be different than mine. Because to me, it's like there is a sexuality put onto women when we're like thinking about this. And I'm not trying to be like guys aren't sexy, but I'm just saying like there is like a sexuality component, and maybe it's something else. So correct me if I'm wrong, but there is a different feeling when it's like, I'm going to notice like, oh, you're wearing like an interesting like pattern. Wow, Alex. But then it's just like with somebody else, it could be like, or wow, her shirt's too tight. Like it's showing off her boobs, or like her, like I'm wearing like too deep of a V-neck, or my dress is too short, according to somebody.
Much more about the
and I just
fit
feel like it's more, it turns
women.
to like a bodily thing. And it just feels like, I don't know, there's like a shame that can come along with that, like this judgment. But I think that there is like a difference between men and women in it somewhere. I'm not saying that like we're like both aren't judged and both like don't have issues, but there's like this connection and right that you have to like my body that like I don't think that we put on men.
Right. Well,
and I'm not trying to polarize. Like that's not my heart, but it just feels.
It goes back to even body image issues where I think the heart of a parent asking questions about how do I disciple my child into what to wear. And then you think about, well, maybe depending on their own self-image, they might not have a desire to wear something revealing, where someone else has, maybe they have a more positive body image, and that's where you have to worry about that thing. And so, and it's like, that's a weird battle to be in, because like the parent of the child who has a lower self body image, you might almost be like, man, I wish they thought more, like they were more confident in themselves, and like I would want, you know what I mean? And so there is, I think, almost a little internalized battle there, because it's like, well, yeah, you don't want your kid to have the reputation for not wearing enough clothes, but also you want them to be confident in themselves. And but I hear where you're coming from, Jess, and I think for me, even like with dealing with my own body issues in life, like being heavier set, it's like, man, if I had the physique that I wanted, I would, fashion would be so different for me, because change. I could just I could pull off this look, or I could pull off that, and so I do think that guys deal with that in their own way, but it's like. It's different.
100%.
Yes,
I'm like, I cannot. I have chest hair. That deep V, nobody wants to see that.
Maybe. It's just a different era, maybe.
Well, yeah, definitely a different era. And I'm jealous sometimes too. Honestly, like I have a kid that's 9, like I said, and he honestly is so oblivious to what he wears.
Yeah.
And like at his age, like I wish I was. And I know like parents of kids that are that age that like it's an argument every day what they're putting on, and this looks stupid, and I want more, I need this brand, and I'm jealous of that, because that's not always where my heart's been, like I was keenly aware of what I was wearing compared to other people from a very young age. And I honestly, for me, that awareness was in the church, because I grew up going to a school where I wore a uniform. So everybody wore the same thing all day. And so where I noticed those class issues was either at Skateland, rocking that on Friday nights, and maybe not wanting to be seen as like the loser that was homeschooled. And so I wanted to keep up with people. But then it was at church, like people that wore really nice stuff for my large family was always maybe less attainable, or shoes or whatever. And so I think that fed into like this hunger that, my son's not in that same predicament right now.
Well, just think about how much we put that because of that upbringing, because of our own issues. And then we try to dump that on our kids.
Yes.
And cause I'll buy my kid like a Nike hoodie or something, and I'll be like, man, I would have died for this. And he's just like, okay. I'm like, no, this is cool, right?
Right.
Oh, okay. It's just, it's tough.
It is.
Because we do that. We bring so much baggage to the table of our own issues.
I had an interesting, just even on this topic, it was probably it was a couple weeks ago, and we're getting ready to go to church, and my kids hate wearing pants with a button and a zipper. Like they just love a nice, comfy, elastic pant. You know, who doesn't?
Sweatpants,
who doesn't?
joggers.
I don't. But anyway.
Okay, except for Alex. But they don't like that. They have like a couple pairs like for nice occasions, right? And so my kids came down for church. Like they got dressed. And they are adorable and cute, but they were wearing like a, normal shirt, and then they were wearing the like jogger elastic pants. And in my mind, I'm like, we have to change their pants. Like somebody's going to think something about us if I let them go to church like that. And I had to stop and be like, why do I care? Is it okay for them? Like, and I'm just sitting here like, is it okay for them to wear a jogger pant? Like, I want them to go and connect with Jesus. Do I care? Is this an issue for me to make? But it was just it was a situation where I've been like working on just in my personal life of like being curious about things I'm thinking or like just situations that kind of irk me. And in that moment, I'm like, what is my issue? And it really was my upbringing. And then, what are people going to think about the Hollies? Like, do they look disheveled? Like, oh, great.
If my kid doesn't come home in Jordans and they see pictures, how ashamed are they going to be? I mean, it is just silly how much even those first outfits. Today, a funny story, my wife comes in and she's like, Lydia, who's my 4-year-old, soon to be 5-year-old, she's like, Lydia told me she doesn't want you to get her dressed this morning because every time she wears this outfit, you tell her she looks swaggy, and she hates that word. And so she had there's this she wears the sweatsuits, and every time I'm like, dang girl, looking swaggy today, looking so flot. Like I just talked like that to my kids. So to me, I'm like even she hears those things.
He's put me in anything else.
No, I'm not letting daddy because I don't want him to say anything about my shirt. I'm like, man, am I ruining her by...
I know.
She's like, I hate that word. She doesn't know what it means.
Yeah.
I won't use swaggy.
But even just how we're influenced, not even that's even a negative thing. Like you're hyping her up.
Yeah.
But just how even from a young age we're influenced and we make connections and we even remember things that people say about what we've worn.
So what are some personal Sunday standards that you just don't break?
Yeah.
Or you follow any personal style guides? You're like, this is just what I do.
Yeah, for me, I wear pants.
You wear pants.
That's a good
no shorts?
choice.
Not shorts.
Okay,
no shorts.
That's what you mean.
Not a skirt or anything. Not shorts. So I long
Kilt?
pants are what is pretty much a personal thing for me. Hats, I don't wear hats into a worship space. And I have no qualms about somebody who does, but it's. For me, it's like, hey, this is a way that I want to show reverence and separate myself. Like I could wear every other 6 days a week. I'm probably wearing shorts, especially in the summer. And I'll probably put shorts on if it's a hot day once I get home. But it's just one of those things for me that I'm like, okay, slacks or, at least long pants are one of those things. A hat is one of those. It's even like if I wear a hat and I'm coaching soccer or whatever and a prayer moment comes up, like for me, it's like I'm almost autopiloted into taking my hat off for that moment. And again, if I have an assistant that doesn't, I'm not offended, but to me, it's kind of one of those it's a posture thing to me. That's not forced on anybody else, but I do say that's probably one of those things that I'll probably present to my kid and not mad if he decides not to, but hey, because these things are nonverbal communication as well. Yep. What we wear and the things that we do and how we posture ourselves are, nonverbal things that if we know why we're doing it, then I think it's okay. And if we're not forcing that onto somebody else, again, I think it's okay. And we do have even standards at the church for our band and people on stage as far as just not distracting things. So we'll say, hey, here's a color palette to stick to and not a bunch of brands all over because even for the camera, it's going to pick up, kind of weird things. And so there's things that we try to do on stage to eliminate so even choir robes, all those things were birthed out of that kind of to eliminate distractions, not necessarily be all formal. And so that's for me. How about you, Jess?
Well, I was just thinking about how, even taking your hat off, when you pray or something like that, it's okay. We can say it's a fashion thing, but it's also saying hey, like, this is how I show my love for the Lord. And I think it's like a simple way for us to even set an example for
Yeah, I mean, to me,
people.
I'm like, I do that for the national anthem, for example.
Yeah.
Like, there's that expectation of reverence. And so, hey, I'm going to do that for the Lord. But again, it's not like it's not an apples to apples thing, but that's just,
right.
And I was in Boy Scouts of America growing up, and that was kind of something in respect and posture.
I mean, I don't think you
respect.
grew up in the Midwest without that being instilled in you.
Yeah.
Like
Right.
you took your hat off when you pray. You took your hat off during the national anthem. That's just
very much a culture thing. I'm not sure if that's even in other cultures, but
I know for me, I've been in situations where I'm like, I put this hat on because my hair is bad today. I'm not taking it off when you pray.
Right.
If this little piece of cloth keeps me separated from God, then I got bigger issues. But that's also just like, I think I've so much of my spiritual journey has just been like identifying what that relationship is for me and going, okay, is this a hindrance for me or is this a hindrance for other people? And and I think there are certain audiences where I'm like, okay, I need to do this because I'm in the presence of this person who this is going to offend if I don't do it. And I think even like whether I was like back in the day leading worship at a church or something, what's their style? Like what can I get away with wearing there? What are they going to accept? Or what how am I presenting myself in these different arenas? Where some of it just you can get so caught up in the religiosity of it all that it's
totally.
like that's where I'm kind of like
I think for me, I feel like I just like wear stuff to like try to blend in. Because I mean, for same reasons, but I had like this awkward moment where, because I wouldn't wear shorts to church, but we had our 100-year celebration this last year, and we talked about this on the podcast because Alex and I were in the dunk tank, but not you, Eric.
No.
So I guess my goal still in my life is to get you in a dunk tank.
all right.
But that's for another time. But I wore shorts to volunteer even at church, and I had like never done that before. And it was hot. Like, who cares? Nobody cared. Like, nobody noticed.
It was hot outside.
But I was. It was hot
outside.
It was hot outside.
Okay.
I was. Yeah.
Just clarified.
Yeah.
For people to know what you were saying
Thank
about
you.
it.
It was hot.
I wore
outside.
shorts and it was hot.
It was hot. Okay. And you guys are distracting me.
Sorry.
Oh, but it was weird because in my mind, it's like you don't wear shorts to an event like at church. Like, and that's just like, that is literally a preconceived notion that out of my upbringing, like nobody's ever necessarily said that to me.
Yeah.
But I was like, oh my goodness, I'm wearing shorts. And then I'm like in a dunk tank. So I'm like wearing a tank top.
Yeah.
And it just like all felt like, I'm totally fine. Jess, you're totally okay. Like, nobody cares. Nobody's judging you.
I'm sure somebody cared, but I mean, we won't get into
Alex
that.
was probably judging me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
just because you had a bigger line afterwards.
I did.
wanted to
Yeah,
dunk
that
you
was
'cause
why.
you're
He
so
was
much
a little
cooler.
jealous. So, I don't know. There's these connections that we make. And for me, like, I'm saying that to point out that we make connections that aren't real sometimes. Like, they're not true. There's not a lot of validation in them. But, I mean, maybe it's things that we've chosen to believe that it's like, hey, it's okay to not have that thought or to change your mind or to do something different.
Yeah.
And Jesus loves you.
Well, certainly I think there is a discipleship component to all of this. You know, like you were sharing, Eric, that for you, you're like, yeah, I mean, a hat does not separate me from God, which is absolutely, it's true. And so, that there's that me being comfortable and shedding, deconstructing even, because it's not always a bad word, some of those preconceived things that I had, and maybe they tied me to religious things. But there's also discipleship of like, one thing that I've wrestled through, and I like fashion, I like clothing, I am passionate about it. And, there's moments where it's like, okay, I've got 2 feet, one body. How much of this do I need? How much of this do I need to accumulate? How much of this is like honestly, when I started the podcast, I had I'm not going to repeat. See how long I can go without repeating the same shirt.
I don't.
How long did that last?
That's funny that I think we were playing that game together a little bit there. That's
and that is that's a pride thing, and it's probably not really modeling health. It's not a good thing. And so there's moments where I catch myself doing that. And I've had conversations with people, that are close to me about, hey, sometimes I do have a problem with like wanting the newest, the best, to be seen as keeping up, with trends. And then there's moments where we had a guy named Joshua Becker on talk about minimalism, and I'm like, oh, I long for that.
Yeah.
Because it's so much simpler and I need that in my life. And so then there's moments where I'm like, I feel like the Lord's asked me, instead of like fasting from something, to, hey, these next 30 days, 5 articles of clothing. Like that's, or 5, underwear are not counted in there, everybody. Okay. But
people are already doing the math.
You can do that. And nobody, when I've done that, no one's been like, dude, you are wearing that a lot.
Yeah.
And so there's moments where I have to remember that, and is it about a name brand? Is it about, these types of things? I justify like, oh, I can buy more Tom's shoes because I'm doing something good. And it's like, no, I don't actually need those. And I could actually do a lot more good by giving that full proceeds to mission work.
Does the Bible give us any dress code? Would that be easier if there was just is there a biblical dress code that we could follow?
We're in a series on Genesis, and so, clothing was introduced to essentially, as a representation to cover shame and, things like that. There's some powerful stuff inside of it.
Yeah, but that's almost, God isn't the one.
He was the provider of it. Yeah.
Well, but they made the clothes, right? Like they found leaves and put it on there. So they were the ones that were feeling
that shame,
that shame, but it wasn't that. God already saw them naked before that, so it's not like...
And then he clothed them in something better with sacrificing an animal.
Right.
And so I think it does obviously have roots in like what that looks like, and sometimes we talk about Adam and Eve being naked and all that kind of stuff. And in the Old Testament times, there were specific... Levitical laws, and you can find it in Deuteronomy as well, not to mix certain linens or cloths together. And again, that was, I think...
Don't wear white after Labor Day. That was in Leviticus, I think.
Yeah, that was Leviticus 23. No, not at all. But those were essentially things to help people stand out against, falling into the trappings of what everybody else was doing inside of culture and so on and so forth. And those things aren't carried on. But Timothy talks about this and sometimes gets a bad rap because a lot of this is maybe addressed specifically towards women. He talks about it in Titus as well. But 1 Timothy 2, 9-10 says, likewise, all women should adorn themselves in a respectable apparel with modesty and self-control, not with braided hair and gold pearls or costly attire, but with what is proper for women who profess godliness with good works. And so there are some churches that, and probably the one you maybe alluded to earlier, Jess, that really cling to this being a modern biblical example that should be followed, and I think it's a stretch on hermeneutics to contextually take that and think that it's really about braided hair. Like, don't come in here with braids or with any kind of gold on or pearls or any of that kind of stuff. And the modesty, the word modesty there too is actually more around humility.
Yeah.
Then I think oftentimes as we think like terms like modest is hottest, it's not necessarily like how long are those shorts, but modesty like humility. And so there's a spot in scripture that I think that's one of those places people would point and say, hey, yep, there's a clear mandated dress code because it specifically talks about that and in the context of church. But I think you'd be making some hermeneutical errors to copy and paste that into society right now.
I mean, even again, the church I grew up in, you were not allowed to wear makeup, jewelry of any type, not even wedding ring. Like wedding rings were bad. Like if you that was against the biblical teaching to wear a wedding ring.
And so it was because more of the humility thing of like.
I mean, it was just the way it was taught. It was just anything jewelry was. Yeah, I mean, it was too flashy.
So how do people find out about that?
What's that?
How do people find out? Was it just like your church had rules, or it was just kind of like an unspoken thing?
Yeah, I mean, it was this weird. I
were
remember
welcome to church.
I remember siblings of mine getting married and incorporating a ring in the ceremony, and it was the big. I mean, there was already no alcohol or anything like that at the wedding or dancing or anything, but that was like the biggest controversy ever. It later changed when I was older. That stuff changed, but I remember my sister wearing makeup, and my grandma would call her Jezebel all the time for wearing makeup. And so it's just, that sort of shame that kind of sticks with you, though. When it's used as daggers at people. So,
and I think there is a beauty to this simplicity that is at the heart of something like that, which I would guess the heart of something like that is like a modesty, like let's not flex, on one another. Like my ring's bigger than your ring, or mine's gold, or I think that's one thing I enjoyed about uniforms growing up.
It's religious guardrails, and I think a lot of churches early on probably had the best intentions with it. It's not about oppression. It's about, hey, like let's do this thing together. We're this community. There's unity here. We're even the robe thing. Like, hey, we're all in the same playing field. We all look the same. It's just there are probably good intentions in a lot of this, just because we're safeguarding ourselves. Because I've mentioned this before on the podcast, but like no dances, no bowling alleys, no movie theaters, none of that stuff was allowed. So it was just that was all guardrails to say, let's just make sure that we're on the straight and narrow, because we don't know, so we'll just make a rule about it. It's easier if we all have rules that follow. And I think sometimes there's probably a longing for people even today to go, man, I just wish the church would tell me. Like, just tell me to do this or don't do this, because that would be easier,
For sure.
I think you're right that a lot of things stem back from, I mean, if we're giving people the benefit of the doubt, we'll say like everything stemmed from good intentions. But it's one of those things where it's like, okay, like to a certain extent, Eric, you're still talking about this like, 20 years later. Like I'm still thinking about how I was made to feel because I am a girl and I'm supposed to be modest and love Jesus. And apparently like the length of my dress determines that. And so there's a point where it's like, we're still thinking about it years later, and it has an influence on us. So even things made in the best intentions, as we've kind of grown, it's like we need to relook at those things. And does it still fit?
Right.
With not just our culture, but just like, how does Jesus want us to live and to, put parameters around people? I don't know. And I think they're like, it's one of those things where I think that there's still churches where there are expectations on clothing and all of that. Okay. And I don't think that we're necessarily bashing on that, but just like speaking from our experiences, like that influenced me, not necessarily all positively.
And I don't mean to say, oh yeah, they had the best intentions, it's fine, I'm excusing it. But I think that a lot of times people will come when they hear that and if they weren't raised that way, they're like, oh, it's about control. The church wants to control you. And that's all they cared about was control. And I'm like, no, I mean, I understand why people's hearts go to that. And because I could feel that too. But then I also think that there was, when you look at the history of some of that, there is deep compassion and concern for the soul, the eternal soul of people, and they are trying to safeguard against that. Then you do run into this thing, like you're saying, where it's now people are abusing this, and they are, where we have declassed ourselves, now we are using this as a way to measure up to one another in a different way, to go, oh, okay, well, you're showing too much skin, you're this, you're that, and then we use it to criticize people and to hurt people, and then that's no good either.
Well, and in some ways there's a beauty to just communicating what it is, and because there's some churches, I think especially some super hip churches where every church, I think we have a come as you are kind of mentality. That seems to be, in a positive way, whatever. A lot of churches are like, we'll accept whatever. But that's not reality when you go there. There's this unspoken expectation of like a hipster church or what. And a lot of that's not based on because how someone's preaching, but it's like based on how you're dressing, and what those expectations are for me to fit in here and feel like I belong. Because if you do stick out in some kind of place, then that's scary, And if you're the only one,
didn't Erin Bradley was on the podcast talking about celebrity culture. She mentioned how going to a church in LA, people are going to be dressed incredibly different than what we would see here in the Midwest. I mean, a personal experience I had when I was really young that kind of was very formative for how I dressed at church was when I was in high school. I was really working on a friend of mine, wanted to bring him to church. I was dudded up in my suit, looking as sharp as I could. And I picked him up and he had jeans and I don't know, some sort of shirt on. And he saw me and he felt so inadequate right away. And I could see it in his eyes like, oh man, what's going on here? And I realized how intimidating it was because he'd never seen me in a suit ever. Just, we'd been at school and that was it. And that day, that just kind of changed me because I realized that he didn't even own a suit. But he right away, the standard had been set in his eyes. And he's just already people think I have to be good to get Jesus instead of I need to get Jesus so I can get good. And to put on this almost false sense of this is what you need to get to my level, to come to church. And I think that's where that really formed my viewpoint. And from that day, I never really dressed that much to church. Not that maybe I didn't want to, but I was like, I want people to feel like anybody can walk in this door and feel accepted no matter where I'm at.
Yeah. And I think, churches have done things to, for their volunteers, like, hey, we want you all to look a certain way. We want you to be easily noticed for guests, and so we'll put you in this T-shirt or this. Yeah. And I've seen that, kind of pressing into that mentality of, hey, we want to be sensitive to anybody that walks in, but also I think you have to be sensitive to that person's convictions. Man, if somebody's been, that's where they were raised. This is the one suit they have. This is the one day that they get to dress up. And that really means a lot to them to be reverent towards God, to wear a collar and things like that. That we have to also respect that part of their discipleship.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, I think sometimes we can be overly pushy towards, well, this is about, other people feeling welcome, which is good. But if you're not comfortable, like if I'm not comfortable worshiping Jesus, and it feels like I'm out of my element and this shirt is too tight on me, or like, honestly, I'm like, man, if I feel like maybe when I lift my arms, my shirt's a little short, like I'm like, oh, okay, I'm not going to do it that day. I feel a little breeze coming in because I don't need anyone to see my,
sure, unsure commercials.
No high fives.
Yeah.
So I do think it can be one of those things that goes very much both ways. And at the heart is obvious, and we talk about this all the time, where it becomes the center. What's the motivating behind this? And that's what we don't often talk about. It's just one of those unspoken, kind of weird, ambiguous kind of conversations. And so
truly.
And I feel like we could go a lot of different ways. I would like to kind of go back to the modesty issue, Jess, that you brought up, because I think we just kind of breezed over it. One of those things that comes up a lot in that topic is, are women responsible for dressing in a way that doesn't attract attention? And I think I've heard teachings on this from both sides. Yeah. And I mean, it doesn't sit right with me when I hear a man saying that a woman needs to dress a certain way because I'm going to sin if you don't. And it's like, well, God made us this way, visual creatures, whatever, and it's like, okay, yeah, but God also taught us a lot of different things in his word about being measured and self-control and that sort of thing. So as a woman, how does that make you feel when you hear those things? What would you say to women who are maybe struggling with that?
I think for me, its root is back in like almost like a toxic masculinity. So it like comes back to like, I guess I start back with being a distraction and modesty. It's like, I just think like, how is that just my responsibility? How is that just a woman's responsibility? And I feel like more men should be like, no, like I have more respect for myself and my wife or myself just in general, even as a single person, to like not objectify a woman. Cause I think that that's really like at the bottom of it. If we're saying like someone's being a distraction, like there's something in there where there's like an objectification. I think this is like a huge struggle. It's something that I'm a mom of 3 boys And so even now, I mean, and I just like, I hope that it makes a difference. But like even now with my kids, because, you know, we have friends that have daughters, and it's just like if they wear, we'll say like a bikini, I don't care. Like, and I don't make it an issue with them. But if anybody says anything and I do the same thing, and I, again, hope I'm doing the right thing with just racial stuff. If it's like someone points out, this person is black, or mom, this person is wearing a bikini. Okay, give me another detail about that person. Because they are more than the piece of clothing they're wearing. They are more than the color of their skin. And I think we're teaching in that, just like the people are more than something. There are other things to identify people, but we've had this fixation, and I don't know, like I kind of go back to purity culture, and I'm like, how much is in there? How much have we cultivated in there? And I know there's a lot we could say, but
so many times I feel like men are put in this box of we're just rabid dogs.
Well, yeah, you're animals,
and it's like, well, if you put a piece of meat in front of that dog, he's gonna bite. You just can't stop that. That's the way men are. And
I think it's just right.
And to me, I'm like, okay, well, what are all these other practices that are scriptural that I've had to implement in my life to try to attain what Christ has set forth in front of me? You know, like, and then you're telling me I can't abstain from this one thing, and the woman has to make the change, right? And I just, like, if there's anything I want to impart on my son, it's like, you're responsible for your actions, you're responsible for your thoughts, you're responsible for the way you look at women. Like, this is on you. This is not on them. And I mean, that's where I get frustrated with it. Yeah, would I like women to respect themselves enough to maybe not wear certain things like that at a church service or in a place where I wouldn't, want that? Maybe, but maybe not. It's just, that isn't on me. That's not my, they're responsible for themselves. I'm responsible for myself.
Yeah. And my hesitancy in saying like, Jess, what do you think about this, is to put another rule on a rule.
Right.
And so it's more of like, where's our culture? How has it gotten to this point? Is this okay? Is what I'm wearing like something that I feel like is honoring to God? I mean, I want to ask more personal questions versus like, hey guys, what do you like think that like this is videotaped? Is like, I'm dressed way more down than you guys. Are you judging me? I don't know. There's like,
you could use a Western shirt.
Right.
As the veteran, youth ministry person for over a decade. This was always a thing.
I'm sure.
As you're working with kids that are in puberty and going through these things and having feelings for the first time, you're like, hey, we want to take you to the water park, and everyone's going to know who the Christian group is because everyone's got, all the girls have T-shirts on.
The Mormon underwear.
All of those types of things that you have to navigate. And ultimately, I think part of it comes back to, no matter what, if you ask somebody why they wear what they wear, I mean, somebody that chose what they wore, there's a lot, we've even revealed that about ourselves a little bit today. Yeah. There's way more depth to it.
Right.
That is a part of, that says something about who we are in our hearts, our identity, our confidence, our respect, how much we really do believe that we are enough, just because of who Christ is and what Christ says about us versus approval of other people. And so there's so much more of that, than meets the eye. And so, with teenagers, a lot of times I was always grateful, and I always wanted to make sure I positioned myself in places to never have that conversation with a young lady, to always make sure there's other women that were asking those deeper questions. Because behavior modification is not going to change somebody. It's asking that deeper question, for whether it's baggy or whether it's goth or whether it's, leggings or whatever that is, that swimsuit. Like, I want somebody that's discipling them enough to ask those difficult questions around, hey, why? I mean, is this for attention? And sometimes it's yes. And sometimes the attention is wearing hardly anything. And sometimes you're looking for attention by wearing something way bigger, or the boyfriend jersey, or whatever it is. All of that speaks louder than we think about what we're looking for. And so someone to say automatically, hey, a girl is wearing that skimpy thing because she just wants attention, isn't always accurate. because it can happen the opposite way, or the person that's fully clothed and doesn't want you to see any part of their body. Like, if it's a hot summer and you're sitting at a pool and you're that person, you obviously want attention, and not 100% of the time. That's obviously, but so I think,
but that's even tough though, because I think, some people just want to live their lives too. You know what I mean? Like if they feel confident in this and, this is what you're going to the pool with, they just want to live their lives. And so the idea that, they're just looking for attention can be kind of a bad way to look at things too,
Yeah. And so, anyway, so that's why I think there are definitely places you need to have those conversations.
Right.
And that's a part of the discipleship for kids, is like, even when they're wanting, once my kids start to want to buy a brand or wear this or whatever, it is because there's something deeper inside of us that we're longing for to have met inside of this. And it's not bad. We have to wear clothes. We have to make those choices. It's you're going to get arrested if you don't. So how do we disciple somebody as we're having those conversations?
There are some colonies that you might be able to
There
join.
are some places or resorts or whatever, but we're not actually recommending any of those. I don't think today.
I think it's interesting being just a attender of this church for the past 10, 11 years and just hearing about how our culture here has changed. Before Mark was here and kind of all of us staff, there was a dress code. There was an expectation for coming into church, and there was an expectation of if kids were, or if a baby was in the auditorium, or if you brought coffee into the auditorium, all these things. And it's just interesting, like, because we have such a diverse congregation of how the older people in the congregation have said, like, hey, I remember this. And it's been tough for some people to adjust, because now we have drink holders on the backs of our seats. But it's just like, we can change. And there is, I think we're saying there is some growing pains to that. But the adjustment is able to be there.
Yeah.
And there's that conversation around, like, if you know something is causing someone to stumble, and I think that's where people took that to an nth degree with, like, and trying to use that to create behavior modification, and it created a shame culture, I think, and especially in women and youth ministry and purity culture. That, but there's reality to that, that if what I'm doing, and it's not whether it's clothing or what, it's being cognizant of other people around me. If what I'm doing, like, on stage is like wearing something that's like super elaborate, I think that's where Preachers and Sneakers whole account comes in, with these pastors that are wearing things that I would say, man, that's not representing humility. That is, if what you're wearing is unattainable for most of the people in your congregation, even if someone gifted it to you, what are those lines and how do you approach that? I think those are very real internal things that we have to work through, which is why I think, like, having more of these open conversations about this type of stuff is probably more important than meets the eye, because if you start to ask yourself, and it's scary, if you start to ask yourself a lot of questions about, man, why do I do what I do? How much of that is baggage I've inherited? How much of that is tied to an identity that I'm trying to, how much of that is I'm just a poser, and I'm not satisfied with myself? It gets deep.
And it's just that simple rule of putting yourself in other people's shoes. Because I think I've heard women say, oh man, a man in a uniform, whew, I can't resist. You know what I mean? And it's like, that's the most clothed they can be. And still, you're going to tell them they shouldn't wear that because they're distracting. It's just, it goes both ways. So this idea, a lot of times, that it gets put on the gender is really frustrating, I think, to me. But anyways.
And some men, I'll just say, some bros, pastors these days, their shirts are tight.
They're bringing everyone to the gun show.
Everyone to the gun show, and there's like this okay to sexualize that.
It's because I'm of mind and body. I'm honing it. I'm disciplined in both areas. Is kind of the argument. There's some fact to that, but
it's something that's like a constant navigation, right? Like this is something where it's like an evolving thing, where we grew up not that long ago in a society that was much different than we are now. So it's like, that's why it's important to have these conversations.
Yeah, and again, we kind of mentioned that at the beginning. Like, is there a point to this? And I don't know that we're going to drive home unnecessarily or a specific point, but I think that in this conversation, there's a lot of different eye-opening things where we can learn about ourselves and learn about why this stuff can be either troublesome to us, and maybe it's just having those conversations with other people and even with your kids or other family members. And some people's opinions are just not going to change, and that's just the way it is. So
you made it this far, you lasted with us, we love you.
Yeah, thank you. That does it for this episode. If you have any questions or concerns, or if you'd like to recommend outfits to us, go ahead and send that to us on social media at CCC Omaha, or you can send us an email to podcast@cccomaha.org. Until next time, we'll talk to you then.